What's going on, everybody? It is TripleCrown24 back today with a new episode of the Sports Card Psychology Podcast, where we go inside the mind of the hobby. And today we are talking about middlemen. This is not the last time that you will probably hear me dive into the subject of middlemen because there are so many examples of it out there in the hobby. Some of the examples that come to mind and some that I saw scrolling the various timelines this week, gathering inspiration and ideas for this show would be middlemen such as group breakers or group submitters. And unfortunately, a lot of times I hear the negatives that are going on with these places. I saw earlier today, as a matter of fact, that there is another Marks Cards esque situation that is going on with some European group submitter to PSA. As a group submitter myself to PSA and SGC, that's something that I have a bit of a pulse on and would definitely like to cover in a future episode. But that's an example of a middleman that we often see in the hobby. Another one that has a greater sense of a middleman out there would be distributors. So those who facilitate the movement of sealed product from the actual manufacturers like Topps, Panini, and Upper Deck to the venues that will eventually sell them, such as card shops, wax dealers who set up at shows or travel around, also the group breakers out there, or even sometimes directly to the customers themselves. Those are probably more traditional senses of the word middlemen, and perhaps because they are individual figures, such as a group breaker, you can identify as a actual middleman, like it's an individual person, or a group submitter like myself. I could be viewed as a middleman in the sense because I'm just one single entity. But it doesn't always have to be just one person. In fact, it can be an entire platform or a group of people that we can look at as a middleman. And that is what we're looking at today with eBay, one of the largest, if not the largest one out there in the sports card hobby. And why do I say that? Well, eBay is a platform that is a conglomerate of sellers who bring their items to the table, metaphorical table, and buyers come to eBay's website or mobile application and they can search for items that they're looking to purchase and be connected with sellers who have those items available. And the transaction occurs between someone who is utilizing eBay's platform almost in the sense of an independent contractor, not fully in that sense, but there are certainly some parallels there, and this buyer looking to purchase the product. Very few times are these transactions going through eBay themselves, other than eBay processing the payments, taking a portion of the proceeds from the sale, and then also mediating any conflicts that may be resolved, as well as policing their own website for any nefarious behavior that may be going on. But those last few parts are really where that resentment comes in. It is great to have an online platform where we can sell cards, in a platform as large as eBay. It's a very well-known platform. If you're looking for a card, it is probably the most likely place that you will find said card. But it gets a lot of resentment, not only from buyers, but mainly from sellers. And that is what I really want to dive into in today's video, is to understand why there is so much resentment around eBay, and is it fair? Is it justified? We'll play devil's advocate a little bit there. I'm someone who sells on eBay full time. They're not the only platform that I use, but they do make up a very large portion of my business. And I will try to avoid using as much of my own personal experiences in here, but I will add them when I feel the commentary is necessary. This is an article that was put out in the New York Times a couple of years ago, in the tech section. It's called "Sorry, eBay and Uber, You're Hated. Why the Middlemen Are the Internet's Villains." And I'll give a link to this in the description down below. I thought the author did a fantastic job with this article. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, you can read along with me here if you prefer, or if you're listening on the podcast, should be pretty easy to find with a quick Google search if you want to pull this up somewhere. But the article starts off in a sense that I think really describes what happens whenever a new middleman service is introduced. It's practically an inevitability of the digital world. The middleman eventually becomes the villain. And that is just so true, because oftentimes these new platforms come through and people think it's going to be this great thing. People get extremely excited, but eventually a lot of these platforms have to add policies and regulations so that it's not just the Wild West, and give protections to both the buyers and the sellers, those with the means and those looking to purchase the means, the goods and services, if you will, through these platforms, and try to keep the interests of both sides in their in the best interest of the company as well. And managing all of that is as complicated as it probably sounds, and finding that right balance. Uh, the article in the second paragraph kind of ties into what I was just saying. You might not think of it this way, but middlemen that connect buyers and sellers are everywhere online. And that is true. If I want to sell my cards to a specific buyer, a lot of times out there, I won't know that that buyer exists, or I won't know that they are looking for a specific item unless I put it up on eBay. It's a store that is constantly open. Aside from if there's some kind of site maintenance or application maintenance, you can access eBay 24/7, 365. And because of that, my items are always available for buyers who may be looking for them, which is nice. I don't have to rely on networking myself and trying to look for certain buyers to match up with my items. It is one of the big benefits of using a platform like this, especially one that is well known as eBay. Chances are, if you're looking for a specific card, your best chance to find it will be on eBay. And that's not always the rule. There are certainly exceptions to that. But generally speaking, that is what I have found in my experience over the years in the hobby as both a buyer and as a seller. So middlemen companies are very profitable if done correctly. And usually they are fairly low maintenance. They do take on a bit of risk. If you are running some kind of middleman service through a selling platform such as an eBay or a MySlabs or an Amazon, their role is often to facilitate and mediate any kind of conflict between the buyer and the seller. But the vast majority of transactions are seamless. They are simply providing a platform and doing the crossing of the T's and the dotting of the I's, with taking care of collecting sales tax, for example, or processing payments through PayPal, credit cards, gift cards, whatever medium may be used. And they are taking care of all of that for you, which is one of the benefits to using their platform, and how you can say that, well, their prices that they charge for fees and all that are justified because they are taking care of all this for you. And there is certainly an argument to be made that you should be paying for this service. And I do not disagree with that whatsoever. I think that, yes, it would be foolish for these platforms to not collect these fees because, well, I don't know how they would stay in business otherwise. Through advertising alone would probably be a scary proposition. But yes, for me, the question would be, are the fees outrageous? I think that is oftentimes one of the complaints with it. And you will see here, the grievance often with these websites is that sellers believe a marketplace is charging them too much, making unfair rules, getting rich off their work, or all of the above. And as the article says, these may seem like whiny complaints, but they are real. If you are running a business, you are trying to reduce your overhead as much as possible. You are trying to reduce your cost of business as much as possible, without sacrificing the quality of your product, your goods, or your services. And it's a fine line to balance. And oftentimes, if you do make those sacrifices, then it's going to come back to bite you later on down the road. Again, a discussion for a different time. But essentially, the goal of eBay is to give you the tools that you need to better sell your items, or at least give you a platform to stand on, metaphorically speaking, to put yourself out there and put your products and services out there in order to sell them. But at the same time, as someone who is a seller, I can certainly empathize, and I can certainly voice my own frustrations sometimes when it comes to some of eBay's policies, as well as the chunk of change that they're taking out of my pocket. For example, I pay for a store subscription. I actually recently reduced my store subscription from $300 a month to $60 a month, just because I have downsized my store significantly. But I was giving eBay over $3,500 a year last year just to have the store and the benefits that come along with it, which is a lot of money. I'm giving them all that money to essentially run my storefront digitally, and that doesn't even include my physical space that I work in and all the costs that come from that. That is just having a storefront on the digital landscape, not even talking in the physical sense. Uh, and some of the policies that they have put in place definitely have made it more difficult, in a sense, to conduct business. And one of them I'm going to talk about here in just a moment is the big example in today's episode. And a lot of times, a lot of the benefit that comes from this experience is gained through eBay. What do I gain from it? Well, I'm able to move my products and I am being financially compensated for those products. In this case, my cards. I'm selling my cards, I get the money for my cards. But the transaction, oftentimes I find, is that sellers, they may come back to my specific eBay store, but a lot of times they're going to come back to eBay, not necessarily come back to me if they have a positive experience through eBay. So by providing excellent customer service or providing them a quality product that they are satisfied with, I am doing my part to improve eBay's reputation and kind of fuel the machine, if you will, more so than I am myself in a lot of cases, which is another reason that people may have resentment towards them. And I think that is a perfectly fair criticism. You don't want someone taking all of the credit for your work. For example, if you were to present an idea to your boss, so that you, let's say that this is an advertising firm and you were promoting this new ad campaign and you tossed out this idea out there that you parlayed to your boss who may have the resources or the connections to make it happen. And then your boss, once it happens and it's successful and they're praised for it by their superiors, they take all the credit for it. Want to be fair, right? And you would feel some type of way about that. Well, a similar sense can be found with eBay when you have a platform such as this, where they gain a lot of benefit and a lot of the reputation through people coming to their platform to buy it. And it isn't as much so passed on to the sellers. It does happen from time to time. I mean, there are people who save me as a favorite seller, or they come back and make offers on my stuff, or they'll reach out to me and see if I have any new products in my store. And all those things are great, but that doesn't always happen. And in fact, those cases are usually the minority compared to the majority of what happens, where eBay reaps a good chunk of the benefits through me using their platform as a quote unquote power seller. Uh, and the rest of the article talks about this idea of a alternate marketplace idea that would reduce the resentment towards a middleman. I don't think it's too relevant to this discussion, but I wanted to at least touch on these points here because, again, I thought it did a fantastic job of talking about why the middleman is so hated, and specifically why eBay is so hated. I'm going to share something else with you now. This really goes into a point with eBay that I've been seeing a lot of complaints around recently, and not necessarily my own experiences, but seeing what other people have said about these experiences with this certain program is something that has caught my eye for a long time. And that would be their authenticity guarantee program. This is something that is not new to eBay in the sense that they have done this for sneakers for several years now. You can see at the top of the webpage here, if you're watching on YouTube, they have an overview of the service, I should say, as well as which categories or which types of goods that authenticity guarantee covers. So you see here sneakers, but it also goes for handbags, it goes for watches, it goes for jewelry, and it goes for, as is relevant to this discussion today, trading cards. If you're not familiar with authenticity guarantee, essentially how it works is that there are two separate facilities that cards are sent to, depending on whether or not they are graded. And one of them would be CSG or CGC, who inspect the raw cards, whereas PSA inspects the graded cards. They have partnered with eBay, where if a card is over $250 in value, and these are single cards, so if you were to buy something that's a lot, that would not qualify for this. But for single trading cards, what happens is that they are sent to these facilities. They will inspect them to make sure that they match the description and these are actually authentic cards, they're not fakes. And then they will send the cards over to the buyer. When this program was introduced, it immediately caught backlash. I mean, there are several YouTubers on here that I follow who weren't a big fan, or perhaps they were a bit skeptical when this first came out. And I am certainly one of them. I don't think I publicly put it out there, but I was one who was skeptical about it. And now that it's been going on for the better part of 9 months or so, I can look back at it retroactively and kind of identify what concerns of mine back when this was first announced are legitimate and which ones are perhaps have been calmed by actually seeing this practice in action. Full disclosure, I personally have not used this service uh, in terms of being a buyer. I have not bought a card that is over $250 in value on eBay, but I have sold several. And knock on wood, so far, none of them have failed the authenticity guarantee process, which is a positive. And I hope that that situation doesn't come up because it kind of sucks, or at least I would imagine that it would suck for it to not go down. But I'm going to show you an example of a card that I recently sold that will be going through this program and why it may be something that people don't want to use as both a buyer and as a seller. So here is the card here. I'm going to try to scroll up very carefully so that I do not show the buyer's information. Let's try to stop there. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure this is spaced properly. Okay, here we go. So here's a look at the listing. It is my pickup from one of the latest card shows, the Cade Cunningham Ice Prism Rookie PSA 10. Best offer was accepted on this above the $250 threshold, which means that this item qualifies for the authenticity guarantee program. So what am I going to do with this card? Well, I am going to package it up on the day that I am recording this, and then I am going to send it to a facility, which will be PSA in this case, since it's a graded card. They will inspect it to make sure that the slab is legitimate. They will inspect it to make sure that the card inside the slab is legitimate. Of course, they're not going to crack the slab out or anything. They'll probably check the cert number, make sure it matches up with what is in their system as well. And then they will check my description to make sure that this is what I described it to be. And I'll show you down here right now, what could it be? Well, here's my description. I have a general note here for cards that are raw, what I classify as, this is what I'm saying, that they are near mint condition or better. Here's what I qualify as near mint. And then you see my shipping policy as well. And then if there are any condition issues, I'll put it there. And then you see my item specifics. These are used for search engine optimization. I don't usually fill out all of these. A lot of times they are redundant, but I have to pay close attention to them through the process here, which I think is one of the downsides of this middleman process. So what are some of the benefits? Well, the buyer of this card is going to have the peace of mind that it was examined by an expert, someone who works with PSA, who is going to say, yes, this is this Cade Cunningham card. It is in the holder that it was originally placed into. The holder is an authentic PSA holder. The seller has not altered it in any way, and basically that anything that would be fraudulent or misconstruing what the item actually is to the buyer. It's going to match up with all of the item specifics, and then it is going to be forwarded along to the buyer. Now, what are some of the problems with this, and why do people have disdain for this specific program? Let me look at it from a buyer's perspective. Number one is that they are going to have to now wait additional time, whereas if I ship this out to them today when you see this, if you're watching on the day that this is released, it will be Thursday. If I shipped it out today, most packages I send out get to their destination within 2 days. So it would get there on Saturday. They would have the same week they purchased it. Now, if I send this card out, I've had some take up to 7 days. Even I think maybe there was one that took up to 10 days to be authenticated after I had sent it there. And now it is going to be uh, basically sitting at this facility with no real timeline. Now, they do have on the order details page, I'm not going to pull it up because I don't want to put out the customer's information or anything that might be sensitive, but it will show a little timeline where it will say that, hey, it's been shipped to this facility, and then okay, we've authenticated it, and now it's heading back to you. But there isn't really too much that you get to see behind the curtain. So where your card is in the process or where it is in the queue, you don't exactly know. It's about as transparent, if not a little less, than what you would actually get to see if you were submitting cards on your own to PSA or any company, even CSG there, from my own personal experience. But it is somewhat transparent in terms of where your card is in the process, but not fully. There's not the sense that you know where your card is exactly at any given time, where you may have a better sense of that if it was mailed directly to you and it wouldn't have to go through more hands. Another concern as a buyer would be that the card could be potentially damaged. If you look at the authenticity guarantee when it was first released, a lot of times a lot of the raw cards would be put in card savers, and then the card savers would be strapped to a piece of cardboard by these two loose little bands. They're somewhat like, I would say, something between a hair tie and a rubber band in terms of what they were. They're elastic. They're not meant to damage the card, but I did see in some cases where the card was damaged or the card slid out of the card saver. And they have rightfully addressed those issues. They now put the card in a tamper proof seal team bag, and they also have added two additional straps so that all four corners of the slab or the card saver are secured down so that they don't get loose. They're put inside this cardboard box. I haven't personally examined it. I have seen a few of them in person. They seem fairly sturdy. They seem like the quality of cardboard that I would use if I was just packaging up a slab anyways to protect it during transit. And they also put it in a box. So there is that. I think they do a pretty solid job, or as good of a job as you could ask for, given the sheer number of these cards that I'm sure that they're going through. There are a ton of cards out there that are worth $250 or more that probably go through their hands each and every day. And they probably do as good of a job as they can given all the circumstances. Now, for me as a seller, what are the downsides to this? Well, I'll say that the biggest positive for me, and this also goes for the buyer before I get into the downsides, is that there is going to be no disputes. If you see in my description here, let me scroll up, or if you go to the returns section, returns, this item is final sale and cannot be returned. So one of the big problems that we saw really in the peak of the hobbies boom, and this isn't a new issue and it still goes on today, but it was a lot of people disputing condition. And oftentimes when a player got hurt or something happened, people would make these false claims and get the cards returned because they didn't want to honor the price or they feel they overpaid given some circumstances that came to light after an auction ended or after they had agreed on a best offer to purchase a card. This will not happen now. There is going to be no dispute, no hearsay over he said, she said about the condition. It is going to be examined by a third party who is neutral on the situation. It will determine if it matches the description or not. I've sent cards there that weren't in perfect shape, and I did disclose them, and the authenticator agreed with my assessment of it. And I think that's been a big part of why I haven't run into any issues yet. But as for me as a seller, I have to be extremely meticulous in how I describe things. So if you look here at my item specifics, each of these needs to be correct. If this was, for example, if I fat fingered the team and maybe I just wasn't thinking and I put Detroit Tigers instead of Detroit Pistons, that card would have been bounced. I actually was trying to sell a Miguel Cabrera card where I had an offer out and I mistakenly put in Detroit Tigers. And I called eBay to ask them specifically, will this hinder the process? Because it was actually a Florida Marlins card. Even though he plays for the Tigers now, the card itself was a Florida Marlins card. And I was told that yes, the item would likely get bounced back. So I had to decline the offer. And then eventually the seller found another one, or the buyer found another one, and it cost me a pretty legitimate sale, which I was not happy about. Is it my fault for not double checking that? Yes, it is. I will take responsibility for that. But the seller, or I would say that the buyer, common sense would tell you that they knew it was a Florida Marlins card. And at the end of the day, did it really matter too much that I had that there? I guess that's up to you to be the judge. For someone like eBay, they don't want to have any of that gray room there as someone who would have to take on some part of the liability. So I could understand that from their perspective. But at the same time, that is one of the catches in the system where if they were to catch that and reject my item because of that, where I feel that it defeats the purpose of the authenticity guarantee. Now, if my card was fake or I was describing it as something that it clearly wasn't, then yeah, they have every right to, and they have every right to do whatever they want anyways, because it is their platform and their policies. But going back to that article, it does feel very arbitrary where all these little tiny technicalities might trip me up at any given time, and the rules seem to be constantly changing. For example, I have an O'Neill Cruz Panini RPA that is listed that will be sold at a price most likely that is above the authenticity guarantee threshold. And I have to really take a close look at it because when it goes to the team, is it a Pittsburgh Pirates card? Because it's not a Topps card. It's a Panini card. So is it licensed by Major League Baseball where it says Pittsburgh Pirates? No, it says Pittsburgh on it. So is the team technically the Pittsburgh Pirates, even though it just depicts Pittsburgh? I don't know. So I took away the team there from that because I wasn't sure, and I don't want to have to deal with the hassle of the item being sent back. And even more so as a buyer, one of the downsides, again, going back to that, is that even if they say no, there is no option to waive the authenticity guarantee and say, I still want the item, or at least at this point in time, there isn't. Will that change? I don't know. I would say probably not, just because eBay wants to protect themselves and it leaves room for disagreement. I don't know if there is a way for them to kind of make it where it's a binding agreement where a buyer says, like, I agree to these terms if I accept the card, knowing that it isn't in this authenticity guarantee. Perhaps they would charge an extra fee for that. I don't know. But at this point in time, there is currently not that option, which means that it adds this middleman process in there. And the middleman is not really willing to negotiate with the buyer or the seller. If they want to forego this process, then there really is no option if you are buying a car that's above $250. Now, there are ways to avoid it, but all of them come to the detriment of a platform like eBay in this case. So, what are some of the ways to avoid it? Well, don't spend $250 on the card. I've had several auctions where I sold cards that I thought would break that threshold, where the bids came in around 230, 240, or a lot of people making me offers on cards that are around 230, 240, where they wouldn't break that 250 threshold because they don't want to go through the authenticity guarantee process. Some people will absolutely pay that peace of mind. I definitely would in certain circumstances. I would pay for that just to know, especially on raw cards. I would say slabs, I'm a bit more comfortable with identifying what a fake slab looks like. But in terms of raw cards, it's certainly nice just because there are a lot of things that you cannot see through a picture online. But again, I don't have that option to waive that or not. And for me personally, it would influence me. I'm going to share something else with you. Moving off of the Cade Cunningham card, one of my good friends, Eric, those back pages. I talked to him very briefly leading up to recording this episode today, and I wanted to quickly share this. I pulled up a separate incognito window here to show you. This is one of his most recent videos. You can go check it out, episode 444. This is his first time getting the authenticity guarantee or any card through that service via eBay. He bought a slabbed card here. It's a 1954 Topps Gordie Howe. You can kind of see his review of it and see how he gets it in. And I asked him a few questions about it. I asked him, how likely would he be to come back to this service? Or how likely would he be to place a bid that is under $250 if he wanted to avoid it? And one of the things that he told me was among the most common complaints that I hear about this service is that he was not a fan of the additional time that it took. It took way longer to get this than it probably should have. And on top of that, he also told me that depending on the circumstance, yes, he may actually bid under $250 on a card that otherwise he would have bid more on, which means that eBay, if a card is ending up selling for less, then that is something uh, that they would lose out on because they're not going to get as much in their commission. And I'm sure that they are gaining some sort of there's some sort of lucrative deal between them and PSA or them and CSG to have these cards go through. And if it's a deal that is contingent on the number of cards that are being authenticated by these services, if those quotas aren't hit, that could also perhaps hurt any future negotiations that they may have in getting these two sides to agree to continue this service going forward. So you see this video here. I'm going to drop him a like, but well, I'm not logged in. That's why there's no like on that. But I'll have to make sure I dropped him a like. But go check out Eric's channel if you want to see some great content, and also check out this video if you want to see more about his Gordie Howe card here, and you can see a bit more about the process. But my point here is that I've also seen people on a poll on Twitter asking, will you purposely try to conduct a deal off of eBay, which is a big no-no, by the way. eBay does not like you to do that if it means avoiding this process. And although I don't have the exact tweet pulled up for me now, over 80% of the people said that yes, they would try to make a deal off of eBay, or they would go to another platform to specifically look for a card if it meant not having to go through this process. They would go to MySlabs to try to find the same card. They would try to reach out to different sellers that they may know on social media platforms. And that is a terrible thing for eBay because it is taking business off their platform. So instead of reduced commissions, as I mentioned in the previous example, then they're taking in even less. They're not even getting anything if the platform, if the deals are not happening on their platform. And if you go back to my Cade Cunningham listing there, you probably saw something there with them also advertising their eBay vault. Now, off the top of my head, this episode's running a bit long anyways. I can't tell you specifically what the advantage necessarily is for them with the eBay vault. I haven't looked into it really all that much because it's something that doesn't interest me. Perhaps vault services is another topic for a different day. But they are pushing this as well. Which again is another middleman here. But now they're actually just holding your cards for you. And for some people that might work, especially if you're someone who's trying to flip or trying to resell or invest or whatever your terminology may be. But for a lot of people out there, they want physical possession of the card. They want to have the card that they paid for in their hands. They want to be able to have the flexibility with it and, no pun intended, not have it locked in a vault somewhere where they don't have as readily available access to it as they would if it was in their hands. So while I do see the benefits of a vault service, again, a discussion for a different day, a lot of what eBay does in terms of adding more and more middlemen services to what is already a middleman service causes more and more resentment because a lot of people feel that a lot of these steps are unnecessary. It's not as streamlined and as simple as possible. But unfortunately, a lot of times these policies are put in place for a reason. I'm sure eBay isn't just sitting around saying, this would be fun. Why don't we try this? A lot of this probably came up because there were a lot of complaints from buyers and also sellers who said that they were, people were lying about certain conditions of cards, especially on these high dollar cards where a return on this or getting a card swapped out and having other fraudulent activities occur could be very detrimental to a business. So yes, this is beneficial for sellers as well. And I am grateful in some senses that this has come up. I would like more changes, such as not being treated like I am guilty until proven innocent anytime a buyer has a dispute against me. That would also be a nice feeling because beggars can't be choosers and I'll still keep using their platform. But this is definitely something where it didn't come out of nowhere. There is a reason for this. And unfortunately, the good comes with the bad, and sometimes it takes putting these practices into motion to really see what are the true strengths and weaknesses rather than just a explanation or a preview that comes out in a seller update or some kind of press release that comes from a platform such as eBay. But again, it's these middleman type of services where when they have to add in these policies to police themselves, where this resentment generally comes in. And sometimes these ideas are accepted, sometimes they are scrapped due to such negative feedback, or they just go poorly. And sometimes they are improved upon because there are adjustments that can be made to benefit both sides, eBay as the middleman themselves, and then also the buyers and sellers who utilize their platform, because a lot of times eBay needs those buyers and sellers to coexist and vice versa as well in the hobby. So hopefully that was a good breakdown of why eBay as a middleman gets so much resentment, especially compared to other platforms. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think that eBay does as good of a job as they could? Let me know from both perspectives. I would love to hear both buyers and sellers. What's something that you want to see eBay do that would make your experience more beneficial with them? Or you feel more comfortable buying or selling on their platform? How can they do better providing you this middleman service? And also, do you think that their rates are too high for what you get out of it? I broke that down a little bit earlier on. Would love to hear your feedback about that. Do you think that the percentage that they take off of final sales is fair, or is it too much or too little? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, always encourage you to reach out through any of my social media platforms if you want to continue the discussion. Be sure to see you next week with 2 new episodes of the podcast. Until then, take care, stay safe, be kind.